Ever wonder what happens when an overzealous HOA decides to target the wrong person? I'm a state trooper, with 12 years on the force, but when I moved into my dream home, I never expected the welcome would include escalating harassment, threats, and ultimately the burning of my police motorcycle, all because I wouldn't join an HOA I wasn't legally required to join. Before I dive into this unbelievable story, I'd love to hear your HOA experiences. Have you ever dealt with unreasonable HOA demands? Drop a comment below. The house hunting process had been exhausting. 6 months, 27 showings, and 4 failed offers before I finally found it. A modest 3-bedroom ranch with good bones on a quiet corner lot. Nothing fancy, but it had a spacious garage, perfect for my motorcycle maintenance and enough yard for the German Shepherd I planned to adopt. "You're getting a great deal," my realtor explained as we did the final walkthrough. "It's technically outside the Canterbury Heights development, so you're not subject to their HOA rules, but you get all the benefits of their well-maintained neighborhood." That sounded perfect. After years in apartment complexes with their own restrictive rules, I was looking forward to the freedom of home ownership without additional oversight. The property taxes were reasonable, the commute to the state police barracks manageable, and the neighborhood had an excellent safety record, not surprising given that 2 other law enforcement officers lived within a few blocks. Moving day was straightforward. A few friends from the force helped with the heavy lifting, and by late afternoon the essential furniture was in place. As my buddies departed, I carefully backed my pride and joy into the driveway, a police spec motorcycle I'd purchased from the department's surplus auction and meticulously restored. Though personally owned, I used it for my traffic enforcement duties through a department program that saved the state money while allowing me to ride a bike I truly cared for. I was arranging my tools in the garage when a voice called from the driveway. "Hello there. Welcome to Canterbury Heights." A woman in her 50s approached, carrying a basket wrapped in cellophane. She wore crisp khaki pants, a polo shirt with an embroidered CH logo, and a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Karen Williamson, president of the Canterbury Heights Homeowners Association," she announced, extending her hand. "We like to personally welcome all new residents." "Michael Reeves," I replied, shaking her hand. "Nice to meet you." She presented the basket, which contained local business coupons, neighborhood information, and a thick folder emblazoned with the Canterbury Heights logo. "This contains all our community guidelines, architectural standards, and membership forms," Karen explained. "The annual dues are very reasonable considering the amenities and property value protection we provide." "Thanks, but I understand my property isn't actually part of Canterbury Heights," I said, keeping my tone friendly. The realtor explained I'm just outside the development boundary. Karen's smile flickered momentarily. "Well, technically that's true, but all the properties in this area maintain Canterbury standards. We have an associate membership for boundary properties like yours." She opened the folder, pointing to a map. "See? While your lot wasn't part of the original development, it's surrounded on 2 sides by Canterbury properties. Visual consistency is important for everyone's property values." I nodded politely. "I appreciate the welcome, but I'm not interested in joining at this time. I'll certainly keep my property well maintained, though." Karen's expression cooled noticeably. "Perhaps you don't understand. All homes in this vicinity are expected to comply with community standards, whether through full or associate membership." "I understand completely," I replied, still pleasant but firm. "But I specifically purchased this property because it's not subject to HOA requirements. I promise to be a good neighbor, but I'll be maintaining my property according to county codes, not additional regulations." Karen's gaze shifted to my motorcycle. "That vehicle, for instance. Our guidelines clearly prohibit visible recreational vehicles in driveways. It's not recreational. I'm a state trooper, and this is my duty vehicle. Nevertheless, it should be garaged when not in use," she insisted, her tone sharpening. "And you'll find our color guidelines don't include that particular shade for exterior doors." I glanced at my recently painted navy blue door, a weekend project I'd completed before moving in. "As I mentioned, I'm not subject to those guidelines. But thanks for the welcome basket." Karen tucked the folder under her arm. I think you'll find Canterbury Heights takes community standards very seriously, Mr. Reeves. Properties that don't maintain appropriate aesthetics tend to experience community pressure. With that thinly veiled threat, she turned and walked briskly back to her SUV parked at the curb. Through the windshield, I could see she was already on her phone before she'd even started the engine. I carried the basket inside, extracting the useful coupons before tossing the HOA materials into my recycling bin. At the time, I viewed Karen's visit as merely an overzealous community representative pushing boundaries, annoying but ultimately harmless. How wrong I was. I couldn't have known that within 3 months I'd be standing in my driveway at 3 a.m., watching firefighters extinguish the flames consuming my police motorcycle, with evidence pointing directly to the Canterbury Heights HOA as the culprits, or that the ensuing investigation would uncover a pattern of harassment and intimidation that would ultimately lead to multiple arrests and a complete overhaul of how HOAs operate in our state. But that first day, all I knew was that I'd found my perfect home, and I wasn't about to let anyone dictate how I lived in it, especially someone with no legal authority to do so. The first week in my new home passed uneventfully. I unpacked boxes, arranged furniture, and began establishing a routine in the neighborhood. Several neighbors stopped by with genuine welcomes, mostly quick introductions and offers to help if needed. My next-door neighbor, Tom, a retired schoolteacher, brought over a homemade lasagna and spent an hour chatting about the area. "I see you've met Karen," he remarked, nodding toward the Canterbury Heights entrance visible from my front porch. "The HOA president?" "Yeah." She brought a welcome basket and membership forms. Tom's expression said everything. "Just be careful. Canterbury Heights HOA is aggressive about expansion. Your predecessor had similar visits." I was enjoying the peaceful aspects of the neighborhood, kids riding bikes, joggers in the mornings, and a general sense of safety that made the location perfect. After years of apartment living, having a garage for my motorcycle and space for projects felt luxurious. 10 days after moving in, I noticed the first sign of trouble. While leaving for my shift, I spotted a woman across the street photographing my house with her phone. She quickly walked away when I waved. That evening, an envelope waited in my mailbox, no postage, hand-delivered. Inside was an unofficial-looking notice printed on Canterbury Heights letterhead, Community Standards Notice. The following violations require immediate attention. Unauthorized vehicles stored in driveway. Recreational motorcycles must be garaged. Non-conforming door color. Approved exterior colors attached. Unapproved landscaping. Modifications. Please submit correction plans within 7 days to avoid further action. The notice wasn't signed, carried no legal authority, and most importantly, applied HOA standards to a property outside their jurisdiction. I placed it in a folder labeled HOA and continued with my evening 3 days later. After returning from a long shift, a more formal envelope waited on my door, this one with "Final Warning" stamped in red across the front. The contents were similar but included a $150 non-compliance fee and threats of escalating enforcement actions. This was becoming more than a nuisance. I drafted a letter clearly stating my property's exempt status, attached county property records confirming my boundary location, and delivered it to the HOA office listed on their letterhead. The following. Saturday, while washing my motorcycle in the driveway, Tom wandered over. "Noticed you got the warnings," he said, leaning against my fence. "They usually start with the unofficial notices, then escalate to the threats." "You seem familiar with their process," I noted. Tom sighed. "They tried the same with me years ago. My property is also outside their boundary, but they don't like non-conforming homes visible from their precious development. I have seen them drive at least 3 homeowners out." "Drive them out? How?" "Persistent harassment, daily violation notices, calling county inspectors with false complaints, photographing everything. Eventually, people get tired of fighting and sell." Tom pointed toward my motorcycle. "They particularly hate anything that doesn't fit their luxury community image. The previous owner of your place had a restored vintage truck he parked outside. They made his life miserable until he moved." This explained the focused attention on my police motorcycle, Though impeccably maintained, its utility-focused design didn't match the luxury vehicles in Canterbury driveways. That evening, I installed security cameras covering my property, front yard, backyard, and especially the driveway where my motorcycle was parked. The cameras linked to my phone, with motion alerts and cloud storage for footage. 3 days later, the confrontation escalated. Arrived home to find Karen and 2 men in Canterbury Heights polos, measuring the distance from my driveway to the street. "Excuse me," I called as I parked. "Can I help you with something?" Karen straightened, clipboard in hand. "We're documenting setback violations for county code enforcement. You're measuring my property without permission," I pointed out. "And there are no setback violations here." One of the men, who introduced himself as the HOA Architectural Committee Chair, produced a document. According to Canterbury Heights standards, driveways must be set back at least 20 feet from community roadways. "Those standards don't apply to my property," I reminded them. As I've already explained and documented, Karen's smile held no warmth. "Every property visible from Canterbury Heights impacts our community aesthetics and value. Associate membership is mandatory for boundary properties." "That's simply not true legally," I countered. "My property deed and county records clearly show I'm outside your HOA boundaries." "There is no associate membership provision in county regulations." The 3 exchanged glances before Karen responded. "The Canterbury Board will need to consider appropriate measures for ongoing non-compliance." "Good evening, Mr. Reeves." They departed, but their intrusive presence left me unsettled. I checked my security camera footage from earlier days, discovering multiple instances of people examining my property line markers when I wasn't home. The following morning revealed a new violation of boundaries. My motorcycle's protective cover had been removed and folded, with an orange violation sticker placed directly on the seat. The adhesive left a residue on the leather when I carefully removed it. This crossed the line from annoying to intentional property damage. I documented everything with photographs, then called the local police department to file a report for trespassing and tampering with my motorcycle. As I waited for an officer to arrive, I watched a group of Canterbury residents slow their morning, walk to observe my violation, markedly visible without its cover. Their purposeful pace and pointed glances confirmed what Tom had suggested. This wasn't just Karen's personal vendetta, but a coordinated community pressure campaign. The motorcycle. Tampering was a deliberate escalation, but they had chosen the wrong target. As a state trooper, I understood exactly how to document a pattern of harassment, build a legal case, and follow proper channels for resolution. What I didn't yet realize was just how far they were willing to go to enforce their community standards on someone who wasn't legally required to follow them. Officer Rivera arrived to take my report about the motorcycle tampering. As a local patrol officer, he was professional but clearly uncomfortable, investigating an incident involving another law enforcement officer's property. "We see these HOA disputes frequently," he explained, while photographing the damaged seat. "They rarely escalate beyond nuisance level, but we'll document everything." "This isn't a dispute," I clarified. "It's trespassing and property damage. Someone physically removed my motorcycle cover and placed a sticker directly on the leather seat." Rivera nodded sympathetically. "I understand and will investigate. Just be aware that without clear evidence identifying who did this, it's difficult to pursue charges." My security cameras had captured someone approaching my motorcycle at 2:14 a.m., but darkness and a hooded jacket obscured their identity. The shaky footage showed deliberate actions, removing the cover, placing the sticker, then carefully folding the cover rather than taking it, suggesting this was meant as a message rather than theft. After filing the police report, I contacted an attorney, specializing in property disputes. He helped draft a formal cease and desist letter to the Canterbury Heights HOA Board, citing specific county statutes regarding property boundaries, trespassing, and harassment. The letter clearly established that my property was not subject to their governance and demanded they stop all enforcement actions immediately. The HOA's response came not in writing but in action. Within days, the violations multiplied exponentially. New notices appeared daily, expanding beyond my motorcycle to include improper lawn height, My grass was cut to county standard 3.5 inches, unauthorized mailbox design, a standard USPS-approved box, excessive garden vegetation, a small vegetable garden in my backyard, improper window treatments, my blinds weren't the HOA-approved white, unauthorized recreational equipment, a hammock in my backyard. Each notice included escalating non-compliance fees and increasingly threatening language about community enforcement actions. I documented everything, adding each notice to my growing evidence file while continuing to go about my daily routine. The situation became more public when I attended a neighborhood cookout hosted by Tom. Several Canterbury residents approached me, some apologetic, others confrontational. "We just want to maintain the community aesthetic," explained one woman. "Property values affect everyone." "Your motorcycle ruins the image of our entrance view," stated a man less diplomatically. "Canterbury Heights is a luxury community, not a biker hangout. It's a police motorcycle I use for work," I responded evenly. "And my property isn't part of Canterbury Heights." The tension crystallized when Karen arrived at the gathering. Seeing me speaking with other residents, she immediately inserted herself into the conversation. "Michael has chosen not to cooperate with community standards," she announced loudly. "His property has multiple violations that affect all our home values." The cookout's friendly atmosphere evaporated as Karen continued her public criticism of my eyesore property. I maintained my professional composure. Years of dealing with confrontational traffic stops had prepared me for keeping calm under verbal assault. "My property complies with all county codes and regulations," I stated simply, "which are the only standards that legally apply to my land." "The Canterbury Board disagrees," Karen replied sharply, "and we have methods of addressing non-conforming properties." The veiled threat hung in the air as she walked away. Several residents looked uncomfortable, while others nodded in agreement with her assessment. Tom approached as the gathering dispersed. "That's their typical approach, public shaming followed by escalating pressure." "Has it always been this aggressive?" I asked. "It's gotten worse under Karen's leadership," he explained. "She was elected 3 years ago on a platform of community standards enforcement and property value protection. Since then, they've driven out at least 4 homeowners who didn't fit their vision." That evening, reviewing my security footage, I noticed a disturbing pattern. Different individuals were regularly walking past my property, photographing various angles, and occasionally approaching my property line for closer inspection. More concerning were the nighttime visitors, shadowy figures visible at the edges of my camera range, seemingly assessing my motorcycle and security setup. The next day brought a new discovery. A realtor's flyer from Canterbury's preferred agency listed a coming-soon property at my address, claiming it would be fully renovated to Canterbury standards within months. When I contacted the agency, they apologized for the error and removed the listing, but the implication was clear. The HOA was signaling to prospective buyers that my non-compliance would be temporary. The situation escalated further when I found evidence someone had attempted to access my garage door keypad. Security footage showed a figure in Canterbury-logoed clothing approaching my garage at 2 a.m., trying several code combinations before being scared off by motion-activated lights. I reinforced all security measures, changing codes, adding secondary locks and upgrading to cameras with better night vision. Though the constant harassment was frustrating, I refused to be intimidated out of my legally owned property. The most concerning development came 3 weeks into the conflict. Returning from a late shift, my headlights caught a glimpse of someone crouching near my motorcycle. The figure fled into the darkness before I could identify them, but inspection revealed something chilling. The motorcycle's fuel line had been partially loosened, not enough to cause immediate leakage but potentially catastrophic had I started the engine. This crossed the line from harassment to potentially life-threatening sabotage. I immediately reported it to both local police and my state police supervisors, who now took the situation with new seriousness. What had begun as petty HOA overreach was evolving into something far more dangerous. And my professional training told me the pattern of escalation suggested a critical point approaching. I didn't yet know how right that assessment would prove to be. The emergency call came at 11:27 p.m. on a Thursday night. A serious multi-vehicle accident on the interstate needed all available state troopers. I was just finishing a late dinner when my radio crackled with the request for immediate assistance. In my 12 years as a trooper, I'd developed a routine for emergency call-outs, uniform on, gear checked, out the door in under 5 minutes. Tonight, a complication arose when I tried to open my garage door. The mechanism stuttered halfway, then stopped completely, leaving the door partially raised, but not enough to drive through. After a quick inspection revealed no obvious cause for the malfunction, I made a split-second decision. With injured motorists waiting for help, troubleshooting the garage door would have to wait. I wheeled my motorcycle from the garage to the driveway, locking the partially open door as securely as possible behind me. The next 4 hours were consumed with accident scene management, directing traffic around the overturned tractor-trailer, coordinating with emergency medical services for the injured, and processing the complicated scene for investigation. By the time I cleared the scene, it was nearly 3:30 a.m. I was completing my final paperwork at the accident site when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Tom's number, strange for this hour. "Michael?" His voice was tense. "You need to get home. Now something's happening at your house." "What do you mean? What's going on?" "Fire," he said simply. "Your motorcycle. It's burning in your driveway. Fire department's on the way." I broke every speed limit, racing back to my neighborhood. From 3 blocks away, I could see the orange glow illuminating the night sky. Turning onto my street revealed the horrific scene. My motorcycle engulfed in flames, the fire spreading dangerously close to my house. 2 fire trucks were already on scene, firefighters working to control the blaze before it reached the structure. I parked behind the emergency vehicles and approached in full uniform, identifying myself to the fire captain. "Started with the motorcycle," he explained grimly. "Definitely suspicious origin. We've got the house protected, but your bike is a total loss." The flames illuminated a small crowd of neighbors gathered behind the emergency vehicles. Among them, I spotted several Canterbury Heights residents, including Karen, watching with expressions ranging from concern to what appeared disturbingly like satisfaction. As firefighters extinguished the last flames, the acrid smell of burned fuel, metal, and leather filled the air. Where my meticulously maintained police motorcycle had stood, now sat a blackened frame, barely recognizable. Years of restoration work, countless patrol miles, and my primary transportation destroyed. In minutes, the fire marshal approached as I stared at the wreckage. "We'll need to investigate, but preliminary signs suggest arson. There's splash patterns consistent with accelerants." I nodded numbly, pointing to my security cameras. "I have surveillance footage. That'll help. We'll need to download it immediately." As the investigation began, I checked my phone for security alerts and discovered another disturbing detail. The system had registered multiple camera failures beginning at 2:47 a.m., followed by motion alerts approximately 20 minutes later. Someone had attempted to disable my security system before setting the fire. Reviewing the partial footage showed 2 masked figures approaching my driveway at 3:08 a.m. They moved with purpose directly to my motorcycle, one carrying what appeared to be a small container. The cameras captured them pouring liquid over the motorcycle before the feed abruptly cut to static. "Professional job," remarked Detective Ramirez, who had responded from the local police department. "They knew where the cameras were, tried to disable the system. Fortunately, your backup power kept at least 1 camera running. Word of the fire spread quickly through the neighborhood. By dawn, a small crowd had gathered at the police line, watching as investigators collected evidence from the charred remains. Several of my state police colleagues had arrived off duty to offer support, their presence creating an unmistakable law enforcement atmosphere. I stood in my driveway in full uniform, the morning sun illuminating the destruction. Across the street, Karen and several Canterbury board members watched the proceedings, their expressions carefully neutral. When our eyes met, Karen quickly looked away, murmuring something to her companions before they retreated toward the Canterbury entrance. "We found this," said the fire investigator, holding up a partially burned piece of paper in an evidence bag. "Even charred, The Canterbury Heights logo was visible in the corner. One of their violation notices had been at the scene. The investigators interviewed Tom, who described seeing a vehicle without headlights leaving my driveway shortly before. He noticed the flames. Other neighbors reported hearing engines but seeing nothing until the fire was already underway. As morning fully broke, the reality of what had happened crystallized. This wasn't random vandalism or a mechanical failure. Someone had deliberately destroyed my police motorcycle, my property, my transportation, my livelihood. The partial disabling of security cameras, the accelerants, the timing during my emergency call, all pointed to premeditation. What they hadn't counted on was targeting a state trooper with access to investigative resources far beyond local vandalism cases. As my colleagues documented the scene with professional precision, I knew this had crossed a threshold from harassment to serious criminal activity. The Canterbury Heights HOA had escalated their enforcement from petty notices to property destruction. In doing so, they'd made a critical mistake. They'd burned a police officer's motorcycle. The meticulous investigation that would follow would uncover far more than they realized about their systematic harassment campaigns. Their fire was intended to drive me out. Instead, it had ignited an investigation that would ultimately consume their entire organization. By mid-morning, my driveway resembled a law enforcement convention. The local police department's detective division had primary jurisdiction, but the fire marshal's arson investigators, county crime scene technicians, and several of my state police colleagues were all processing different aspects of the scene. The burned motorcycle sat at the center of this activity, its blackened frame now evidence in what had been classified as a suspected arson and attack on law enforcement property. "This changes everything," Detective Ramirez explained as we stood surveying the investigation. "Vandalism against a civilian's property would be handled differently, but this was a police vehicle, even if personally owned. That elevates the priority significantly." Captain Reynolds from my state police barracks had arrived shortly after dawn. Though I wasn't officially on his clock for this investigation, his presence sent a clear message about how seriously the department took the incident. "We've requested footage from every security camera in a 3-block radius," he informed me. "The state's digital forensics team will analyze your system to see if they can recover any data from the cameras that were disabled." The investigation moved with impressive efficiency. By noon, investigators had collected samples of accelerant from multiple points around the motorcycle, tire impressions from the street, and partial shoe prints from my driveway. The evidence pointed to at least 2 perpetrators who had specifically targeted the motorcycle with professional determination. "They knew what they were doing," noted the fire marshal, pointing to burn patterns. "Used an accelerant that burns hot and fast, positioned to ensure maximum damage to the engine compartment. This wasn't kids playing with matches." The most significant break came when technicians processed my security system. Though the main cameras had been partially disabled, the backup system had captured crucial fragments, including a brief glimpse of one perpetrator's face when his mask slipped while leaning over the motorcycle. "We're running it through facial recognition now," Ramirez said. "Quality isn't perfect, but it might be enough for an ID." While investigators worked, I provided a detailed statement about the ongoing HOA harassment, sharing my file of violation notices, security footage of previous property inspections, and documentation of the motorcycle tampering incident. What had seemed like excessive but non-criminal harassment now took on new significance as potential evidence of escalating behavior leading to arson. "We need to interview everyone in Canterbury Heights who might have information," Ramirez explained. Starting with the HOA leadership. Karen and the board members were interviewed separately at the police station rather than in the neighborhood, a strategic decision to prevent coordination of stories. The initial reports from these interviews revealed telling inconsistencies. Karen claims she was home all night and knows nothing about any harassment campaign, Detective Ramirez reported during our afternoon briefing. But the HOA vice president mentioned a special meeting Tuesday night specifically about addressing the ongoing situation with the non-compliant boundary property. More contradictions emerged as investigators interviewed Canterbury residents. Several confirmed hearing the board discuss enforcement actions against my property, though most claimed they understood this to mean continued violation notices, not criminal damage. The investigation took a significant turn when forensic analysis of the accelerant provided a crucial link. The specific mixture matched materials stored in the Canterbury Heights community maintenance shed, a combination of gasoline and chemical solvents used for pool maintenance and landscaping. Access to that shed is limited to board members and maintenance staff, Ramirez noted. We're getting a warrant to search it now. By evening, the digital forensics team had recovered enough data from the neighborhood's various security systems to identify a critical pattern. Multiple cameras throughout Canterbury Heights had been disabled or repositioned in the hours before the fire, not just mine. This suggested a coordinated effort to prevent documentation of the perpetrator's movements. They didn't count on the Miller family's new doorbell camera, Ramirez said, showing me footage from 3 houses down. It caught a vehicle matching the description Tom provided, leaving your area at 3:12 a.m., right after the fire started. Though partially obscured, the vehicle appeared to be a dark SUV, similar to models owned by several Canterbury board members. More importantly, the camera had captured the license plate's first 3 characters before the vehicle moved out of frame. Only 6 vehicles in the neighborhood match those partial plates, Ramirez explained. We're checking alibis for each owner. The most damning evidence emerged when crime scene technicians discovered a discarded latex glove in the drainage ditch 2 properties away from mine. The glove contained traces of the same accelerant used in the fire, and preliminary DNA testing suggested multiple contributors, meaning it likely contained genetic material from more than one perpetrator. While the technical investigation proceeded, I made a surprising discovery through conversations with neighbors outside Canterbury Heights. Similar patterns of harassment had occurred against other boundary properties, though none had escalated to this level of destruction. 3 previous homeowners had sold under pressure from the HOA, all properties subsequently purchased by Canterbury residents or the developer for expansion. This isn't just about community standards, I realized during my evening briefing with the investigative team. It's a systematic campaign to force out boundary properties for development expansion. Captain Reynolds nodded. Which provides motive. Beyond simple harassment, there's financial incentive for removing non-compliant homes. As night fell on the first full day of investigation, I stood in my driveway looking at the empty space where my motorcycle had been. The charred concrete bore silent witness to what had happened, but the growing body of evidence was beginning to tell the story of why it had happened. What the perpetrators hadn't anticipated was the comprehensive response their actions would trigger. By targeting a state trooper's vehicle, they had inadvertently initiated an investigation that was rapidly uncovering a pattern of behavior extending far beyond a simple neighborhood dispute. The Canterbury Heights HOA had intended to send me a message. Instead, they had ignited an investigation that was about to return that message with the full force of the law. The investigation's first major breakthrough came early on the 3rd day. Detective Ramirez called me at 7:30 a.m., his voice carrying a mix of professional satisfaction and genuine surprise. We've identified the primary suspects, he announced. You're going to want to come to the station for this. 30 minutes later, I sat in the briefing room as Ramirez displayed a series of images on the screen. Enhanced security footage, vehicle records, and most surprisingly, social media posts. Meet your arsonists, he said, pointing to photos of 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a girl, all appearing to be around 17. Jason Bennett, Tyler Wilson, and Mackenzie Clark. I studied their faces, not recognizing any of them. Who are they? Jason is the son of Robert Bennett, Canterbury HOA treasurer. Tyler's mother is Deborah Wilson, architectural committee chair, and Mackenzie is Karen's niece who lives with her. I sat back, processing this unexpected development. Teenagers? I was expecting board members, not their kids. That's what makes this especially complicated, Ramirez explained. We brought them in for questioning after the facial recognition hit on Jason. They cracked almost immediately, each trying to minimize their own involvement. He played video clips from the interviews. The teens' statements revealed a disturbing picture. They believed they were helping their community by driving out an undesirable resident who was ruining property values. "Mom and Aunt Karen talk about it all the time," Mackenzie explained in her recorded interview, tears streaming down her face. "How you're destroying the neighborhood by not following the rules. They said someone needed to take action." Tyler's statement was even more direct. The adults were always complaining about the cop who wouldn't comply. At the HOA meeting, Mr. Daniels said someone should send him a message he can't ignore. "We thought we'd be helping." "They're claiming they never intended to start a major fire," Ramirez continued. "Just wanted to damage the motorcycle enough that you'd have to remove it. But they used pool chemicals mixed with gasoline, not understanding how volatile that combination would be." The revelation that teenagers had carried out the actual arson shifted the investigation's focus. While the youths would face serious charges, their statements opened a more significant avenue: potential conspiracy and contributing to the delinquency of minors by the adults who had influenced them. With search warrants in hand, investigators had seized computers, phones, and records from the homes of all HOA board members. What they discovered painted a damning picture of organized harassment extending far beyond my property. "Look at this," Captain Reynolds said, opening a folder of printed emails. 3 months of communications between board members specifically discussing your property. They called it Operation Compliance. The emails detailed a systematic campaign, first official notices, then escalating to property inspections, followed by direct tampering, and ultimately discussions of more persuasive measures. While no adult had explicitly ordered the arson, the consistent messaging about taking decisive action had clearly influenced the teenagers. Most damning was the discovery of an unofficial HOA account labeled Compliance Enforcement, with over $37,000 in funds used for various activities against non-member properties. Bank records showed withdrawals coinciding with previous harassment incidents, including $2,500 removed the day before my motorcycle was burned. "We've linked this account to at least 7 previous cases of property damage against non-HOA homes," Ramirez explained. "Slashed tires, broken windows, landscaping destruction, all targeting homeowners who refuse to comply with Canterbury standards despite being outside their jurisdiction." As we reviewed the evidence, crime scene technicians made another critical discovery. The partially burned HOA violation notice found at the fire scene contained fingerprints matching both Karen and Jason, directly linking both to the crime scene. By noon, arrest warrants were being prepared for 5 HOA board members on charges including conspiracy, contributing to the delinquency of minors, and destruction of property. The teenagers faced juvenile charges for arson, though their cooperation and the adults' influence would likely be mitigating factors. The investigation had expanded beyond local authorities. Because the case involved systematic harassment and potential racketeering through the misuse of HOA funds, the district attorney's office had assigned a specialized prosecutor who typically handled organized crime cases. "This isn't just about your motorcycle anymore," the prosecutor explained during our afternoon briefing. "We're seeing a pattern of organized activity using HOA authority and resources to harass, intimidate, and ultimately force out property owners for financial gain. That potentially rises to the level of criminal conspiracy under state law." The most unexpected revelations came from Canterbury residents themselves. Once word spread about the investigation, homeowners began coming forward with their own experiences of HOA overreach and intimidation. What had appeared to be a unified community was revealed to be one ruled through fear and selective enforcement. "Karen and the board threatened to fine me $500 a day because my garden pavers were the wrong shade of tan," one resident reported. "When I objected, they started sending violation notices for everything: my mailbox height, my window trim, even the bird feeder in my backyard." Another homeowner shared documentation of being fined for excessive holiday decorations after putting up a pride flag during Pride Month. Others described selective enforcement based on personal relationships with board members, with some violations ignored while others received aggressive enforcement. By late afternoon, the case had attracted media attention. Local news vans parked at the entrance to Canterbury Heights, reporting on the HOA Gone Wild story. The coverage emphasized the shocking escalation from harassment to arson, particularly against a state trooper's property. The day's final revelation came from an unexpected source. Karen's assistant from the HOA office contacted investigators voluntarily. "They've been targeting boundary properties for years," she explained in her recorded statement. Karen calls it community expansion through attrition. Force the non-members out, buy the properties cheap through shell companies, then incorporate them into Canterbury with deed restrictions before reselling at premium prices. This statement transformed understanding of the motive. Beyond simple aesthetic control, the harassment campaign had been a deliberate strategy for profitable development expansion, using intimidation to acquire properties below market value, then flipping them for substantial profit once incorporated into the HOA. As evening approached, I stood in my living room watching the investigation unfold across my neighborhood. Crime scene tape still surrounded the charred remnant of my motorcycle, now covered with a tarp as evidence. Investigators moved methodically between houses, collecting statements and evidence that revealed a years-long campaign of harassment and intimidation. What had begun as an arson investigation had exposed something far more extensive, a systematic abuse of HOA authority for harassment, intimidation, and financial gain. The burning of my police motorcycle had inadvertently triggered the unraveling of Canterbury Heights' entire power structure. The revelations weren't yet complete, but the direction was clear. This case would fundamentally change how HOAs operated in our state, with my destroyed motorcycle serving as the catalyst for long overdue reform. The arrest began at 6 a.m. precisely. 5 police cruisers and 2 unmarked detective vehicles converged on Canterbury Heights, each proceeding to different addresses with synchronized timing. I watched from my driveway as officers approached Karen's 2-story colonial at the end of the cul-de-sac, warrant in hand. Despite the early hour, news crews had somehow gotten wind of the operation. Their vans lined the neighborhood entrance, cameras capturing the unprecedented sight of HOA board members being led from their homes in handcuffs, some still in bathrobes and slippers. "Karen Williamson, you're under arrest for conspiracy, contributing to the delinquency of minors and destruction of property," announced Detective Ramirez, loud enough for neighbors gathering on their lawns to hear. The formal reading of rights followed as Karen was escorted to a waiting police vehicle, her expression a mixture of shock and indignation. Similar scenes played out at the homes of 4 other board members. Robert Bennett, the treasurer who had controlled the enforcement fund, emerged from his house in pajamas, avoiding eye contact with watching neighbors. Deborah Wilson, the architectural committee chair, attempted to argue with officers before being firmly guided to a patrol car. By 6:30 a.m., all 5 board members were in custody, being processed at the county detention center. The teenagers, Jason, Tyler, and Mackenzie, had been taken into custody the previous evening, through arrangements with their parents or guardians, processed through the juvenile justice system. I maintained professional distance from the arrests, following Captain Reynolds' guidance about avoiding any appearance of personal involvement in the case. While the destruction of my motorcycle had initiated the investigation, the charges extended far beyond that single incident to encompass years of systematic harassment and intimidation. The district attorney held a press conference at 10 a.m., outlining charges that shocked even those familiar with the case. "This investigation has uncovered evidence of organized criminal activity operating under the guise of homeowners association enforcement," he explained to assembled reporters. "The defendants are charged with multiple counts of criminal conspiracy, fraudulent use of HOA funds, contributing to the delinquency of minors, destruction of property, and criminal harassment." He emphasized the seriousness of targeting a law enforcement officer's vehicle. "While the defendants may not have personally set the fire, our evidence shows they created an environment that directly encouraged this criminal act, including specific discussions about taking action against Officer Reeves's motorcycle." The arraignment took place that afternoon. I attended in full uniform, sitting silently in the courtroom as Karen and the other board members entered in jail jumpsuits. Their transformation from neighborhood authority figures to criminal defendants was stark, their confident demeanor replaced by the subdued manner of those facing serious charges. Karen's attorney attempted to portray the actions as overzealous but well-intentioned community protection. My client was simply trying to maintain neighborhood standards and property values, he argued during the bail hearing. Any statements made about enforcement were never intended to encourage criminal activity. The judge appeared unmoved. Setting. Fire to a police officer's motorcycle goes far beyond enforcing community standards, she noted dryly. The evidence suggests a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation extending well beyond normal HOA activities. Bail was set at $100,000 for Karen and slightly lower amounts for the other defendants, substantial figures that reflected the seriousness of the charges. All were ordered to surrender passports and avoid contact with any witnesses, specifically including me and all boundary property owners. As the defendants were led away, Karen locked eyes with me briefly. Her expression wasn't anger or defiance, but something closer to confusion, as if she still couldn't comprehend how enforcing her vision of community standards had led to criminal charges and public humiliation. Outside the courthouse, Detective Ramirez provided an update on the investigation's continuing developments. We've identified at least 12 previous incidents where Canterbury HOA targeted boundary properties with systematic harassment, he explained. 3 homeowners were effectively forced to sell below market value, with properties later acquired by entities connected to Canterbury board members. This revelation transformed public perception of the case. What might have been dismissed as an HOA dispute gone too far was now clearly revealed as a calculated scheme for property acquisition through intimidation. Throughout the day, my phone buzzed with messages from other law enforcement officers expressing support and outrage. The thin blue line had been crossed when my police motorcycle was targeted, creating a united front among various agencies supporting the prosecution. More unexpectedly, I received calls from homeowners in other communities describing similar patterns of HOA overreach and intimidation. The media coverage had evidently touched a nerve, encouraging others to come forward with their experiences. By evening, the Canterbury Heights HOA office had been searched by forensic accountants, documenting financial irregularities. Initial findings suggested over $175,000 in membership dues had been diverted to the unofficial enforcement fund without proper disclosure to homeowners, potentially adding financial fraud to the growing list of charges. The day ended with a meeting between Captain Reynolds, the district attorney, and myself to discuss next steps. While the arrests marked significant progress, the investigation continued expanding as more victims came forward and financial evidence revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. This case has implications beyond Canterbury Heights, the district attorney noted. We're seeing similar patterns in other HOAs across the county. Your burned motorcycle might have uncovered a much bigger problem of HOA overreach and intimidation. As we reviewed the day's developments, I realized justice wasn't just about accountability for my damaged property. It had become about addressing a systemic abuse of power that had affected countless homeowners, intimidated into silence by those claiming to protect community standards. The wheels of justice were now in motion, grinding slowly but with inexorable purpose toward a reckoning that would likely change how homeowners associations operated throughout the state. Canterbury Heights had transformed overnight, where pristine lawns and carefully coordinated exteriors once projected an image of unified luxury. Invisible lines now divided neighbor from neighbor. The arrests of the HOA leadership had fractured the community like a stone through glass, revealing cracks that had existed beneath the surface all along. I observed these divisions from my unique position, both catalyst and witness to the neighborhood's unraveling. Each morning, walking to my car, now my primary transportation with my motorcycle destroyed, I noticed residents deliberately turning away or approaching with unexpected friendliness, their choices revealing which side of the emerging divide they occupied. A week after the arrests, Canterbury held an emergency community meeting at the local high school auditorium, neutral territory for an increasingly fractious discussion. Though not a member, I decided to attend, sitting quietly in the back to observe the community's response to their leadership vacuum. The auditorium divided itself without prompting. On one side sat those supporting the arrested board members, many wearing Canterbury Heights polo shirts and maintaining that the HOA had been acting appropriately to protect community standards. The other side consisted of residents who felt victimized by the board's selective enforcement and intimidation tactics, finally free to voice long-suppressed complaints. Karen and the board were just doing their jobs, insisted an older gentleman, at the microphone. Property values don't maintain themselves. Someone has to enforce standards. A younger woman immediately countered, enforcing standards doesn't include burning someone's motorcycle or harassing people whose properties aren't even under HOA jurisdiction. Officer Reeves deliberately provoked the situation by refusing to comply with community aesthetic guidelines, argued another supporter, pointing in my direction. He knew his motorcycle violated our standards when he moved in. He doesn't live in Canterbury Heights, shouted someone from across the room. His property isn't subject to our guidelines. That's the whole point. The interim HOA administrator, appointed by the management company after the arrests, struggled to maintain order as the meeting devolved into increasingly personal accusations. Decades-old grievances surfaced, revealing how deeply the previous board's tactics had divided the community. The most striking moment came when financial statements were distributed, detailing how membership dues had been allocated over the previous 3 years. Many residents saw for the first time that significant portions of their payments had funded the unofficial enforcement activities against boundary properties. "We've been paying for harassment campaigns," asked one visibly shocked homeowner. "I thought my dues covered landscaping and community events, not intimidating neighbors and legal slush funds." The revelation that 5 properties bordering Canterbury had been acquired through harassment tactics, then resold at significant profit, once incorporated into the HOA, transformed the conversation entirely. What some had defended as overzealous rule enforcement now appeared as a calculated financial scheme that had used member dues to fund property acquisition through intimidation. They weren't protecting our property values, realized one former supporter. They were using our money to run a real estate scam. As the meeting progressed, a clear division solidified. Roughly 30% of residents continued defending Karen and the board, viewing their actions as necessary for community protection despite questionable methods. About 50% expressed shock and anger at how their dues had been used and the tactics employed in their name. The remaining 20% seemed paralyzed by indecision, uncomfortable with both the criminal actions and the community's unraveling. During a break in the proceedings, several residents approached me directly. Some offered genuine apologies for the damage to my motorcycle and the harassment campaign. Others maintained that while arson was clearly inappropriate, I still should have been more cooperative with community standards. One older resident summarized the divide perfectly. "This isn't really about motorcycles or property lines. It's about whether you believe rules matter more than people or people matter more than rules." Throughout the following days, the division manifested in increasingly visible ways. Yard signs appeared declaring positions. "We support Canterbury standards" competed with "HOA reform now" across neighboring lawns. Social gatherings became segregated, with residents socializing only with those sharing their perspective on the controversy. The media continued covering the story, with Canterbury becoming a symbol in the broader debate about HOA authority and homeowner rights. Local news crews captured heated sidewalk arguments between neighbors who had previously chatted amicably at community events. Most concerning were the reports of retribution against those perceived as disloyal to the arrested leadership. Residents, who had provided statements to investigators, found their properties subjected to anonymous vandalism. Garden plantings uprooted, decorative fixtures damaged, even tires slashed in one case. In response, a neighborhood watch program formed spontaneously, with volunteers patrolling Canterbury and surrounding properties to prevent further incidents. I noticed these patrols included both Canterbury residents and homeowners from boundary properties like mine, former adversaries, now united in maintaining community safety. The Canterbury Heights website, once featuring pristine marketing images and rigid compliance guidelines, had been replaced with a stark notice: community under interim management pending investigation. Their social media accounts, previously showcasing model properties and community events, fell silent as the management company attempted to distance itself from the growing scandal. Tom observed the situation with the perspective of long residents. "Communities are funny things," he remarked, as we watched Canterbury residents arguing across a cul-de-sac one evening. "They can look perfect on the surface while rotting from within. Sometimes it takes something dramatic, like your motorcycle, burning to reveal what was always there beneath the facade." The property that had once seemed so desirable for its appearance of harmony now resembled a battleground of competing values and accusations. Canterbury Heights had marketed itself as the perfect community, but perfection enforced through intimidation had proven unsustainable. The question remaining was whether anything worthwhile could be rebuilt from the fragments of trust now scattered across perfectly manicured lawns. The county courthouse's largest courtroom proved insufficient for the crowd attending the first day of trial. 3 months of preliminary hearings, evidence reviews, and failed plea negotiations had culminated in this moment: Karen Williamson and 4 HOA board members facing a judge and jury for charges ranging from conspiracy to criminal harassment to destruction of property. I arrived in full dress uniform, directed to the reserved seating in the front row. The prosecution had prepared me thoroughly for my role as both victim and witness, emphasizing the importance of maintaining professional demeanor throughout what promised to be contentious proceedings. When the defendants entered, the transformation was striking. Gone were the HOA polo shirts and confident posturing, replaced by conservative business attire and subdued expressions. Karen, previously so commanding in her HOA authority, appeared diminished in the context of actual legal proceedings. Her eyes briefly met mine before darting away, perhaps finally comprehending the gravity of her situation. The district attorney's opening statement established the narrative that would frame the entire trial, not just isolated harassment or a single act of property destruction, but a systematic campaign of intimidation for financial gain conducted under the guise of community standards enforcement. The evidence will show that Canterbury Heights HOA, under Mrs. Williamson's leadership, operated a calculated scheme targeting properties outside their legal jurisdiction, he explained to the attentive jury. When Officer Reeves refused to surrender his property rights, this escalated to criminal destruction of his police motorcycle, a vehicle used in the performance of his duties protecting the very community these defendants claim to have been serving. Karen's defense team attempted to create distance between the board's enforcement activities and the actual arson. While the Canterbury board may have been overzealous in their community standards enforcement, they never directed or authorized criminal property destruction, her attorney argued. The unfortunate actions of impulsive teenagers should not be attributed to community leaders who simply cared deeply about their neighborhood. This strategy collapsed during the first week of testimony as the prosecution methodically presented evidence linking board discussions directly to escalating harassment and ultimately the arson. Email chains showing board members discussing the need for direct action against my motorcycle, financial records documenting the unauthorized enforcement fund, and the teenagers' testimony about how adult conversations had influenced their actions created an undeniable pattern of causation. My own testimony occupied a full day. I presented the chronology of harassment with professional detachment, the violation notices, the property inspections, the tampering incidents, all documented. With meticulous attention to detail that reflected my law enforcement training, the prosecution walked me through the night of the fire, my discovered motorcycle ablaze in the driveway, the investigation that followed, and the financial impact of losing my service vehicle. During cross-examination, Karen's attorney attempted to portray me as unreasonable for refusing to comply with simple community aesthetic standards. "Officer Reeves, wouldn't it have been easier to simply garage your motorcycle rather than engage in this prolonged dispute?" "My property isn't subject to Canterbury HOA regulations," I replied evenly. "And the motorcycle was frequently needed For emergency response, making immediate access essential. The question isn't whether compliance would have been easier, but whether private citizens can legally impose their rules on properties outside their jurisdiction through harassment and intimidation. The most compelling testimony came from Canterbury residents themselves. Numerous homeowners described the climate of fear created by selective enforcement, retribution against those who questioned board decisions, and the gradual understanding that their dues were funding harassment campaigns against neighboring properties. I watched them target Officer Reeves exactly as they had targeted others who didn't conform, testified one elderly resident. First the notices, then the public shaming, then the property damage. It was a pattern we'd seen before, but never questioned because we feared becoming the next target. Financial evidence proved particularly damning. Forensic accountants detailed how properties targeted for enforcement had subsequently been purchased by shell companies linked to board. Members, once owners, sold under pressure, then resold at substantial profit after incorporation into Canterbury, with HOA deed restrictions. By the third week, even Karen's most loyal supporters appeared to recognize the inevitable outcome. Several defendants approached the prosecution about potential plea agreements, offering testimony against Karen in exchange for reduced charges. These negotiations further fractured the defense, creating a dynamic where former allies now sought to assign blame to one another. The jury deliberated for just 7 hours before returning their verdict. Karen and Robert Bennett were found guilty, on all counts including conspiracy, contributing to the delinquency of minors, destruction of property, and fraudulent use of HOA funds. The remaining board members received guilty verdicts on some charges with acquittals on others, reflecting their varying levels of involvement. Judge Harrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, but made his perspective clear. This case represents a profound abuse of power and trust. What began as enforcement of community standards evolved into criminal harassment and property destruction. The court takes particularly seriously that the target was a law enforcement officer's service vehicle, potentially impacting public safety. As the defendants were led away, Karen turned toward me one final time. Whatever she might have hoped to communicate remained unexpressed, her previously confident demeanor now completely absent. The transformation from HOA president to convicted criminal was complete. Outside the courthouse, reporters sought my reaction to the verdicts. Maintaining professional composure, I focused on the broader implications rather than personal vindication. This case was never just about my motorcycle. It was about establishing that homeowners associations, while serving important functions, must operate within legal boundaries. No organization, regardless of its stated purpose, has the right to harass and intimidate those who aren't subject to their authority. As cameras flashed and questions continued, I noticed Canterbury residents gathered behind the media, not divided as they had been at community meetings, but standing together, unified at last in witnessing justice served for actions committed, in their name but without their true consent. The legal reckoning had established accountability for past actions. The more challenging work of rebuilding community trust still lay ahead. 6 months after the sentencing, where Karen received 3 years in state prison and Robert Bennett 18 months, Canterbury Heights had transformed in ways few could have predicted. The physical appearance remained largely unchanged. The same manicured lawns and coordinated exterior color schemes still presented a unified aesthetic to passing traffic. The fundamental difference lay beneath the surface, in the community's governance and spirit. My driveway now held a new police motorcycle, an upgraded model provided through insurance and department compensation. More significant than the replacement vehicle was what stood beside it, a memorial plaque installed by Canterbury residents commemorating the incident that had transformed their community. From Conflict Reform read the simple inscription, Established 2023. The new Canterbury Heights operated under dramatically different leadership and philosophy. Following the complete dissolution of the previous board, residents had elected a council focused on transparency and reasonable governance. Their first official act had been passing a boundary respect resolution, explicitly acknowledging the limits of HOA jurisdiction and establishing formal boundaries for enforcement activities. We've tried to find the balance between maintaining community standards and respecting individual property rights, explained Jennifer Chen, the new board president, during one of our now regular neighborhood coffees. The previous leadership confused control with community, using enforcement as a weapon rather than a tool. The most visible symbol of this philosophical shift was the redesigned Canterbury entrance, where an imposing gate and guard booth had once stood. A simple welcome sign now marked the transition between public roads and the development. The previously mandatory Canterbury Heights logo displays had become optional, with about 60% of residents choosing to maintain them, while others expressed individuality through personalized home presentations. My own contribution to the community's transformation had extended beyond the catalyst role of victim. Governor Randall had appointed me to the newly formed State HOA Oversight Commission, established to prevent similar abuses of power through regulatory reform. Drawing on my experience as both law enforcement officer and HOA target, I helped draft guidelines establishing clear boundaries for association authority and enforcement methods. The Canterbury case changed how we view homeowners associations across the state, noted Commissioner Leland during our quarterly meeting. What happened to your motorcycle opened eyes to systematic problems in HOA governance and accountability. The legislative impact extended beyond our state borders. Similar commissions had formed in neighboring states, with several adopting variations of our HOA Boundaries Act, restricting enforcement activities against non-member properties and requiring financial transparency for all association expenditures. Karen's legacy endured in unexpected ways. Her name had become shorthand in property law classes for overreach and abuse of authority, with Canterbury syndrome entering the lexicon of community governance failures. Yet even this negative association served a constructive purpose, providing a cautionary example for future HOA leaders about the consequences of exceeding legal boundaries. The teenagers involved in the arson had taken different paths toward rehabilitation. Through a restorative justice program, they performed community service working with fire prevention initiatives and participated in educational programs about legal boundaries and civic responsibility. Their genuine remorse and youth had earned them a second chance, with their records eligible for sealing upon completion of juvenile probation requirements. On a personal level, the incident had transformed my relationship with my home and community. What began as my private sanctuary had evolved into something more interconnected. I knew my neighbors now, not just their faces, but their stories, concerns, and aspirations. The property line still marked legal boundaries, but it no longer represented a barrier to genuine community connection. This evolution was most evident at the first annual Canterbury Community Picnic, held in the development's Central Park. Unlike previous HOA events restricted to dues-paying members, the picnic welcomed all neighborhood residents, regardless of technical boundaries. My fellow state troopers attended in support, bringing their families and department vehicles for children to explore, building positive relationships between law enforcement and the community we served. "It's strange to think this all started with a motorcycle in a driveway," remarked Tom as we watched children playing together on the park equipment. "Sometimes it takes something breaking to reveal what needs fixing." He was right. The motorcycle had been rebuilt, the criminal case concluded, and the community restructured. But the most important reconstruction had been invisible. The rebuilding of trust between neighbors who had rediscovered the meaning of community beyond enforcement and compliance. My home remained exactly where it had always been, technically, outside Canterbury Heights boundaries, but now connected through mutual respect rather than intimidation. My motorcycle still sat in my driveway when not in service, no longer a symbol of defiance, but simply a tool for my profession, accepted as part of the neighborhood's diverse landscape. As evening fell over the community picnic, Jennifer called for attention to make a brief announcement. "Today marks 6 months since we began rebuilding our community on new foundations," she said, raising her glass. "Not foundations of rigid uniformity or enforcement, but of respect, transparency, and genuine connection. We are different properties united by choice, not coercion." The toast that followed encompassed both Canterbury residents and boundary neighbours, former adversaries, now partners, in creating something better than what had been lost in the fire. That changed everything. My new motorcycle gleamed in the setting sun as I rode home that evening, no violation notices awaiting me, no surveillance cameras tracking my movements, just neighbours waving from their yards, as a state trooper returned home to a community that had learned its most important lesson, not from regulations, but from their failure. Some foundations must burn before better ones can be built. Canterbury Heights had emerged from those flames stronger, wiser and more authentically connected than ever before,